Welcome to this channel, where we dive into the most fascinating stories from the past and explore the events that shape the world we live in today. From the rise and fall of powerful empires to the triumphs and tragedies of history, we bring you stories that have withstood the test of time. Today, we embark on a journey through the legendary rise and eventual decline of the mighty Roman Empire, a civilization that has left an indelible mark on the history of the world. From the glory of its republic to the grandeur of its empire, and ultimately to its fragmentation, this is a tale of power, ambition, and eventual decay. Sit back, relax, and let the story of Rome's incredible rise and its eventual fall unfold, as we explore the lessons that we can still learn from its history today. The Achaemenid Persians were initially subject to the Median Empire, which dominated much of Iran at the time. However, Cyrus's rise to power marked the beginning of the downfall of the Medes and the beginning of Persian ascendancy. In 550 BCE, Cyrus led a revolt against the Median king, Astyages, overthrowing him and consolidating control over Media. This victory was significant, not only because it brought the Medes under Persian rule, but also because it provided Cyrus with the resources and military strength to expand further. With the fall of Media, Cyrus turned his attention to neighboring kingdoms and launched a series of military campaigns that would eventually lead to the creation of the largest empire the ancient world had ever seen. One of Cyrus's most significant military successes was his conquest of the Lydian kingdom, located in western Anatolia. In 546 BCE, Cyrus defeated King Croesus of Lydia, whose wealth was legendary, and incorporated Lydia into the Persian Empire. This victory provided the Persians with vast resources, including gold, and solidified their position as a powerful regional force. Following the conquest of Lydia, Cyrus expanded his empire eastward. He defeated the Babylonian Empire in 539 BCE, an event that would come to be remembered as one of the most significant moments in ancient history. The fall of Babylon, which had been one of the most powerful cities in the Near East, was not achieved through brutal force, but through a combination of clever strategy and diplomacy. The Persians diverted the Euphrates River, allowing them to march into the city through the riverbed, while the Babylonians were unprepared for an attack. The fall of Babylon was almost bloodless, and Cyrus's entry into the city was welcomed by many of its inhabitants, particularly the Jewish exiles, whom he allowed to return to their homeland, fulfilling the prophecy of the Hebrew Bible. Cyrus's conquest of Babylon marked the beginning of a new era in the ancient world. Unlike previous conquerors who relied on violence and terror, Cyrus was known for his tolerance and respect for the cultures and religions of the peoples he conquered. His policy of tolerance helped solidify his empire, as he allowed conquered peoples to retain their local customs, laws, and religions. This made his empire more stable and helped foster loyalty among his diverse subjects. Cyrus's vision was not just to build a powerful military empire, but also to create a system of governance that was fair and just for all his subjects. He implemented an effective administrative system, dividing the empire into satrapies, or provinces, each governed by a satrap, or local ruler, who was responsible for collecting taxes, maintaining order, and protecting the territory. This decentralized system allowed for efficient administration while ensuring that the central Persian government retained overall control. Cyrus's reign is also remembered for the creation of the Cyrus Cylinder, a significant historical artifact that outlines his policy toward conquered peoples. The Cyrus Cylinder is often regarded as one of the first declarations of human rights, as it emphasizes the importance of allowing people to practice their religions freely and to return to their homelands. The cylinder was later used as a symbol of Persian imperial policy and has been celebrated for its message of tolerance and religious freedom. After establishing control over the ancient Near East, Cyrus the Great set the stage for the massive expansion of the Persian Empire, which would reach its peak under his successors. His son, Cambyses II, continued the conquest by invading Egypt in 525 BCE, further expanding the Persian domain into North Africa. Under Cambyses, Persia also absorbed Egypt's vast wealth, culture, and strategic importance. Cambyses' reign was marked by his conquest of Egypt, which represented the culmination of Persian expansion westward. The Egyptians, once the dominant civilization in the ancient world, had been weakened by internal strife and external threats, making them vulnerable to Persian conquest. Cambyses defeated the Egyptian king Psamtik III at the Battle of Pelusium, effectively ending Egypt's independence and incorporating it into the Persian Empire. This conquest brought Egypt's resources, including its grain production, under Persian control, further bolstering the wealth and power of the Persian state. Cambyses also launched military campaigns in the Western Mediterranean, though his campaigns in Carthage and Libya were largely unsuccessful. His time on the throne, though important for the expansion of the Persian Empire, was relatively short, as he died under mysterious circumstances in 522 BCE. His death led to a brief period of instability, but it was during the reign of Darius I, 521 to 486 BCE, that the Persian Empire reached its greatest territorial extent. Darius I, often referred to as Darius the Great, is perhaps the most significant ruler of the Achaemenid dynasty. Upon ascending the throne in 521 BCE, Darius was faced with the challenge of consolidating control over the vast empire that his predecessors had built. He quickly established his authority by defeating rivals and putting down revolts in the newly conquered territories, including Egypt, Babylon, and parts of the western provinces. Darius proved to be a skilled military commander and an astute administrator, qualities that would define his reign. One of Darius's greatest achievements was the expansion of the Persian Empire into India. By 516 BCE, Darius had conquered the northwest Indian regions of the Indus Valley, bringing a rich territory under Persian control. This expansion not only increased the empire's wealth, but also opened new trade routes and brought Persia into direct contact with Indian culture and commerce. Under Darius, the Persian Empire became known for its sophisticated administrative system, which allowed for efficient governance over vast and diverse territories. Darius divided the empire into 20 satrapies, each governed by a satrap, or provincial governor, who was responsible for collecting tribute and maintaining order. The satraps were held accountable to the central government through a network of royal inspectors, known as the king's eyes and ears, who traveled throughout the empire to ensure the satraps were fulfilling their duties. This system helped maintain control over distant regions and ensured the loyalty of provincial rulers. Darius also established a standardized system of weights and measures, which facilitated trade across the empire. He introduced a common currency, known as the daric, which helped unify the empire economically and provided a standard for trade. Darius's economic reforms helped to integrate the vast Persian Empire and foster a sense of unity among its diverse populations. In addition to his administrative and military accomplishments, Darius I was a great builder and is credited with constructing some of the most impressive architectural feats of the ancient world. His most famous building project was the construction of Persepolis, the ceremonial capital of the Persian Empire. Persepolis, located in modern-day Iran, was a grand city that reflected the power and grandeur of the Persian Empire. The city featured massive palaces, temples, and a grand audience hall, all adorned with intricate carvings and sculptures that depicted the king's military victories and divine favor. Darius also ordered the construction of a vast system of roads, known as the Royal Road, which connected the farthest reaches of the empire from Susa in Persia to Sardis in Anatolia. This road system facilitated trade, communication, and military movement, allowing the Persian Empire to maintain control over its vast territories and ensuring its dominance in the ancient world. The success of the Persian Empire was not solely due to its military and administrative capabilities, but also to its policy of cultural and religious tolerance. Unlike the Assyrians and Babylonians, who often sought to impose their own culture and religion on conquered peoples, the Persians adopted a more inclusive approach. This policy helped to integrate the various ethnic and religious groups within the empire, contributing to its stability and longevity. Cyrus the Great, the founder of the Persian Empire, is particularly remembered for his tolerance and respect for the customs and religions of the peoples he conquered. When he took Babylon in 539 BCE, he famously allowed the Jewish exiles to return to their homeland and rebuild their temple, fulfilling a prophecy in the Hebrew Bible. This act of tolerance not only helped to establish his reputation as a just ruler, but also helped to solidify the loyalty of his Jewish subjects. Cyrus's policy of religious tolerance was continued by his successors, including Darius I. The Persian kings allowed their subjects to practice their religions freely, as long as they did not pose a threat to the stability of the empire. This policy stood in stark contrast to the oppressive religious practices of earlier empires, which sought to impose one religion upon all their subjects. The Persian Empire was also home to a great diversity of languages, cultures, and traditions. The Persians themselves practiced Zoroastrianism, one of the world's oldest monotheistic religions, which emphasized the worship of the god Ahura Mazda. However, the Persians did not force their religion upon the people they conquered. Instead, they allowed local religions to flourish and even incorporated elements of these traditions into their own cultural practices. This cultural and religious pluralism helped to create a sense of unity among the diverse peoples of the Persian Empire. The Persian kings also sponsored the arts and supported the development of literature, architecture, and science. The empire's vast territory brought together people from many different cultures, leading to the exchange of ideas and the diffusion of knowledge. Persian art, with its intricate designs and monumental architecture, reflected the empire's wealth and power, while also incorporating elements from the cultures of conquered peoples. The Achaemenid dynasty's support for the arts and sciences helped to make the Persian Empire a center of learning and innovation in the ancient world. By the 5th and 4th centuries BCE, the Persian Empire, which had flourished under Cyrus the Great, Cambyses II, Darius I, and Xerxes I, began to face significant challenges that would eventually lead to its downfall. Although the empire had reached the height of its power, the enormous size of the empire, internal strife, overextension, and external pressures began to weaken the Persian state. One of the most significant reasons for the decline was the overexpansion of the Persian Empire. At its peak, the empire spanned from the Indus Valley in the east to Egypt and Greece in the west, encompassing vast and diverse territories. While this vast empire had been highly successful under the earlier rulers, the challenge of managing such a large and diverse territory became increasingly difficult over time. The distances between key regions created logistical challenges in communication, governance, and military defense. The system of satrapies, provinces, had been highly effective in maintaining control over vast territories under Darius I. However, over time, the satraps became more autonomous and, in many cases, exercised considerable power independently of the central government. This decentralization of authority undermined the cohesion of the empire, as local rulers often acted in their own interests rather than those of the Persian king. Revolts and uprisings in far-flung provinces became more common, weakening the central authority and making the empire more vulnerable to external threats. Another internal factor contributing to the decline of Persia was the growing economic strain. The Persian Empire had relied on the tribute system, where conquered peoples were required to send regular tribute to the king. While this system had brought immense wealth to the empire in the early stages, it became increasingly difficult to sustain as the empire grew, with many of the regions facing financial hardship due to taxation and military expenditures. The economy began to falter. The empire's reliance on a small number of valuable resources, such as grain from Egypt and the wealth from the Persian heartland, also made it vulnerable to shifts in the economy of its territories. Moreover, the administrative system, though highly organized under Darius and his successors, became increasingly corrupt and inefficient. Court intrigue and corruption among officials weakened the integrity of the government, and the royal family itself was often embroiled in power struggles. Xerxes' I's reign, for example, was marked by internal dissent and rebellion, as well as military defeats that exposed vulnerabilities in the empire's military structure. Externally, the Persian Empire faced significant threats from Greece. The Greek city-states had long been a thorn in the side of Persia, and the Persian Wars of the early 5th century BCE highlighted the growing power of the Greek cities. Despite their defeat in the Battle of Marathon in 490 BCE, the Persians continued to seek revenge, culminating in Xerxes' I's invasion of Greece in 480 BCE. Although Xerxes won significant battles, such as the Battle of Thermopylae, his forces were ultimately repelled at the Battle of Salamis and the Battle of Plataea. The failure of the Persian invasion of Greece marked a turning point in the decline of the empire's military prestige and power. By the time of the reign of Darius III, the last Achaemenid king, the Persian Empire was in a state of crisis. Weak leadership, compounded by corruption, internal revolts, and a lack of military innovation, had left Persia vulnerable to new threats. The greatest of these threats came from the east, from the rising power of Macedonia. In 336 BCE, a young and ambitious Macedonian king named Alexander ascended to the throne. Alexander III, later known as Alexander the Great, would go on to change the course of history by uniting Greece and launching a series of military campaigns that would forever alter the landscape of the ancient world. His conquests, which spanned from Greece to Egypt and as far east as India, led to the fall of the Persian Empire and the establishment of a new world order. Alexander's rise to power was propelled by his military genius, his ability to inspire loyalty in his troops, and his vision of spreading Greek culture throughout the known world. His father, King Philip II of Macedon, had already laid the foundations for Macedonian dominance in Greece, uniting the Greek city-states under his rule through military conquest and diplomacy. Upon Philip's assassination in 336 BCE, Alexander, at the age of 20, inherited his father's unified kingdom and an army that was well prepared for war. Alexander's military career began with his campaigns against the Greek city-states that had been rebellious in the wake of Philip's death. He swiftly crushed these uprisings, ensuring Macedonian control over Greece. However, his true ambition lay beyond the Greek world. Alexander dreamed of conquering the Persian Empire, the most powerful empire of his time, and uniting the known world under his rule. In 334 BCE, Alexander crossed into Asia Minor with a well-trained and disciplined army. His first major battle against the Persians came at the Battle of the Granicus River, where he decisively defeated the Persian forces. This victory opened the path for Alexander to march deeper into Persian territory. He continued his conquest with remarkable speed, defeating Persian forces at the Battle of Issus in 333 BCE, where the Persian king Darius III was forced to flee, marking a major blow to Persian prestige. One of Alexander's most significant victories came at the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BCE. In this battle, Alexander faced Darius III in an all-out confrontation in northern Mesopotamia. Despite being vastly outnumbered, Alexander's tactical brilliance and the discipline of his army led to a decisive victory. Darius III fled once again, leaving his empire vulnerable. With this victory, Alexander effectively brought down the Persian Empire as he marched on to capture the Persian capitals, including Babylon, Persepolis, and Susa. The fall of Persepolis, the ceremonial capital of the Persian Empire, marked the symbolic end of the Achaemenid dynasty. Alexander's conquest of Persia was not just a military triumph. It was also an ideological one. By defeating the Persian king, Alexander presented himself as the rightful ruler of the Persian Empire and sought to adopt many elements of Persian culture. He even took on the title of King of Kings and married several Persian princesses, cementing his political and cultural ties with the Persian elite. Following his conquest of Persia, Alexander the Great established one of the largest empires in history. However, his empire was not to last long after his untimely death in 323 BCE at the age of 32. The rapid collapse of Alexander's empire after his death left a legacy of profound historical significance, resulting in the establishment of the Hellenistic era. After Alexander's death, his empire was divided among his generals, known as the Diadochi. These generals fought amongst themselves for control of the empire, leading to the eventual fragmentation of the once unified territory. Despite the fragmentation, the legacy of Alexander's conquests continued to shape the ancient world for centuries. His empire, though divided, led to the spread of Greek culture, ideas, and political systems throughout much of the known world, influencing regions from Egypt to India. The Hellenistic period, which began with the death of Alexander, saw the rise of several powerful Hellenistic kingdoms, such as the Seleucid Empire in the east, the Ptolemaic Kingdom in Egypt, and the Antigonid dynasty in Macedonia. These kingdoms continued to promote Greek culture, leading to the spread of Hellenistic civilization across the Mediterranean and into Asia. Greek language, art, philosophy, and science became prominent in these areas, shaping the cultural and intellectual life of the ancient world for centuries to come. One of the most enduring legacies of Alexander the Great was the spread of Greek ideas. Greek philosophers, scientists, and artists were encouraged to travel to the far reaches of the empire, leading to the blending of Greek and Eastern traditions. This cultural fusion, known as Hellenism, had a profound impact on the development of science, philosophy, and art, and it laid the foundation for later cultural exchanges between East and West. Following the death of Alexander the Great in 323 BCE, his vast empire, which stretched from Greece to India, was left without a clear successor. At the time of his death, Alexander was only 32 years old, and he had not designated an heir. His unexpected death, possibly due to fever, illness, or poisoning, left a power vacuum in the empire, which his generals, known as the Diadochi, quickly sought to fill. This period of division and conflict marked the beginning of the Hellenistic era, a time in which Alexander's empire was divided into several distinct kingdoms that were ruled by his generals or their descendants. The division of Alexander's empire was not peaceful. His generals initially attempted to maintain a united front, but internal conflicts and personal ambitions soon led to the fragmentation of the empire. The most notable of the Diadochi, Ptolemy, Seleucus, Lysimachus, and Cassander, became the rulers of various territories, and each of them established their own dynastic rule over different regions of the former empire. The result was a world divided into several powerful Hellenistic kingdoms, each competing for power, influence, and territory. The Ptolemaic Kingdom, founded by Ptolemy Isoter, ruled over Egypt. Ptolemy, one of Alexander's most trusted generals, took control of Egypt after Alexander's death, and his descendants, the Ptolemies, would rule Egypt for nearly 300 years, until the Roman conquest in 30 BCE. The Ptolemies, including the famous Cleopatra's Seven, became synonymous with Hellenistic Egypt and its flourishing culture, especially its capital, Alexandria, which became a center of learning, art, and science. Seleucus I Nicator, another of Alexander's generals, took control of a vast area that stretched from Asia Minor through Persia to India. His realm became known as the Seleucid Empire, and it was one of the most powerful Hellenistic states. The Seleucid Empire included many of the territories Alexander had conquered in Asia, but it was also fraught with instability due to constant challenges from both within and without. Over time, the Seleucid Empire became increasingly fragmented, facing difficulties in controlling its vast territory and dealing with rebellions and invasions from various groups, including the Parthians. Lysimachus, another of Alexander's generals, ruled over Thrace, parts of Anatolia, and Macedon. He tried to expand his kingdom, but faced opposition from other diadochi, and was eventually defeated in battle. His kingdom did not last long after his death, as it was absorbed into the other Hellenistic kingdoms. Cassander, who had been one of Alexander's trusted generals, seized control of Macedon after Alexander's death. He declared himself king and founded the Antipatrid dynasty, which ruled over Macedonia for several decades. Although Cassander established a strong rule over Macedon, the kingdom was often embroiled in power struggles with the other Hellenistic rulers. The continued division of Alexander's empire undermined the power of Macedon, and it ultimately fell under the control of the rising Roman Republic by the 2nd century BCE. The fragmentation of Alexander's empire did not end with the establishment of these kingdoms. Over the next several decades, the diadochi would continue to fight among themselves for control over key territories. These conflicts, known as the Wars of the Diadochi, severely weakened the unity of the empire and resulted in the eventual rise of independent regional powers. The once unified empire of Alexander the Great was now a patchwork of competing kingdoms, each seeking to preserve its own interests. While the political fragmentation of Alexander's empire led to the establishment of various Hellenistic kingdoms, the cultural and intellectual legacy of Alexander's conquests was far-reaching and enduring. The spread of Greek culture, known as Hellenization, became one of the defining characteristics of the Hellenistic world. This process of cultural fusion occurred as Greek language, art, philosophy, and political ideas were merged with local customs and traditions across the empire, from Egypt and Anatolia to Persia and India. One of the most significant cultural impacts of Alexander's conquests was the spread of Greek language. Greek became the lingua franca of the Eastern Mediterranean and much of the Near East. It was used in government, commerce, literature, and education, and it facilitated communication between the diverse peoples and cultures of the Hellenistic world. The Greek language also became the language of scholarship and philosophy, and it played a key role in the transmission of knowledge throughout the empire. The city of Alexandria, founded by Alexander in 331 BCE, became the epicenter of Hellenistic culture. Located on the Mediterranean coast of Egypt, Alexandria grew into one of the most important cities of the ancient world. It became a major center of learning and intellectual exchange, attracting scholars, scientists, and philosophers from across the known world. The Library of Alexandria, one of the largest and most famous libraries of antiquity, housed thousands of scrolls and manuscripts from various cultures, preserving the knowledge of the ancient world for future generations. Alexandria became a hub for the study of astronomy, mathematics, medicine, and philosophy, and it played a key role in the intellectual achievements of the Hellenistic period. In addition to Alexandria, other cities in the Hellenistic world, such as Antioch, founded by Seleucus I in Syria, Pergamum in Anatolia, and Babylon in Mesopotamia, became important centers of Greek culture and learning. These cities were home to a diverse population that included Greeks, Persians, Egyptians, Jews, and others, all of whom contributed to the cultural fusion of the era. The blending of Greek and local cultures during the Hellenistic period also influenced art, architecture, and religion. Greek architectural styles, such as the use of columns, were combined with local building techniques to create new forms of architecture. Hellenistic art, which emphasized realism and emotion, combined Greek artistic traditions with influences from Egypt, Persia, and other cultures. This can be seen in the famous sculptures of the Hellenistic period, such as the Laocoon and his sons and the Venus de Milo, which depicted human figures with a dramatic sense of movement and expression. In religion, the Hellenistic period saw the fusion of Greek gods with those of local traditions. For example, in Egypt, the Greek god Zeus was identified with the Egyptian god Ammonius, and in Persia, the Persian god Ahura Mazda was associated with the Greek god Apollo. This syncretism reflected the growing cultural exchange between the Hellenistic world and the regions Alexander had conquered. The spread of Hellenistic religion and philosophy also contributed to the development of new religious movements, including the rise of mystery cults and philosophical schools, such as Stoicism and Epicureanism. While the Hellenistic period was marked by significant cultural achievements and the spread of Greek influence, the political fragmentation of Alexander's empire eventually led to the decline of the Hellenistic kingdoms. The Diadochi, who had carved up Alexander's empire after his death, were often engaged in warfare against each other, as well as facing external pressures from growing powers such as Rome and Parthia. The Seleucid Empire, once the largest and most powerful of the Hellenistic kingdoms, began to decline in the 2nd century BCE due to internal strife and external threats. The empire, which had stretched from Anatolia to India, faced invasions from the Parthians in the east and growing Roman influence in the west. The Seleucid rulers were unable to maintain control over their vast territory, and the empire gradually fragmented into smaller kingdoms. In Egypt, the Ptolemaic dynasty, which had ruled Egypt for nearly 300 years, also began to face challenges. The kingdom suffered from internal political instability, economic decline, and the increasing encroachment of Roman power. The famous last ruler of the Ptolemaic dynasty, Cleopatra VII, attempted to align Egypt with Rome in her struggle against her brother Ptolemy XIII and later in her alliance with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. However, after the defeat of Antony and Cleopatra by the forces of Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus, at the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE, Egypt was absorbed into the Roman Empire. The Antigonid dynasty in Macedonia, which had been founded by Antigonus Monophthalmus, also faced challenges during the Hellenistic period. While it briefly succeeded in unifying Greece under Macedonian rule, the Antigonids were ultimately unable to withstand the growing power of Rome. By the 2nd century BCE, Macedonia was conquered by the Romans, marking the end of the last of the major Hellenistic kingdoms. The decline of the Hellenistic kingdoms and the rise of Rome marked the end of the Hellenistic period. However, the legacy of Alexander the Great and the Hellenistic world lived on. The cultural and intellectual achievements of the Hellenistic era continued to influence the Roman Empire and the subsequent development of Western civilization. The story of the Roman Empire begins with the founding of the city of Rome in the 8th century BCE. According to legend, Rome was founded in 753 BCE by the twin brothers Romulus and Remus, descendants of the Trojan hero Aeneas, who were raised by a she-wolf and later became the founders of one of the most powerful civilizations in history. While the story of Romulus and Remus is rooted in myth, the actual founding of Rome is believed to have been a gradual process of consolidation by early settlers in central Italy, eventually evolving into a small, strategically located city-state along the Tiber River. Rome's early history was marked by the establishment of a monarchy. The first 7 kings of Rome were believed to be either Latins, Sabines, or Etruscans, and each contributed to the growth of Rome's political, military, and social structure. The last king, Tarquin the Proud, was overthrown in 509 BCE by the Roman aristocracy, marking the end of the monarchy and the birth of the Roman Republic. The Republic was founded on the idea of shared power and governance by elected officials. The Romans established a system of checks and balances, where power was divided between 2 consuls who were elected annually: the Senate, which was composed of the leading aristocratic families of Rome, and the popular assemblies that represented the common people. The consuls were responsible for military command and the administration of justice, while the Senate acted as an advisory body and controlled financial policy. Initially, the Roman Republic was governed by an oligarchy, with the Senate holding significant power over the political affairs of the state. However, over time, the common people, or plebeians, began to demand more political representation. This led to a series of social and political struggles between the patricians, aristocratic families, and the plebeians, known as the conflict of the orders, which lasted for several centuries. The plebeians sought political and social equality, including access to public office, legal protections, and land redistribution. In response to these demands, the Roman Republic gradually expanded political rights for the plebeians, leading to the creation of the office of the tribune, which was specifically designed to protect the interests of the common people. During this period, Rome began to expand its influence and territory through military conquest. The Roman legions, highly disciplined and well-organized, were instrumental in Rome's success. The Romans gradually expanded their territory throughout Italy, first conquering neighboring tribes and city-states, and then challenging the dominance of the Greek colonies in the south of the Italian peninsula. This period of expansion was marked by Rome's victory in the Samnite Wars, which gave it control over much of central and southern Italy. The conquest of Italy laid the foundation for Rome's rise as a dominant power in the Mediterranean. By the 3rd century BCE, the Romans had successfully defeated the Greek colonies in southern Italy, and Rome had established itself as the leading city-state in the Italian peninsula. The Roman Republic's military success, political innovations, and the integration of conquered peoples into Roman society helped set the stage for Rome's future conquest and eventual transformation into an empire. The most significant challenges to Rome's early expansion came from the powerful Carthaginian Empire, which controlled vast territories in North Africa, Spain, and parts of the Mediterranean. The competition between Rome and Carthage for dominance in the Mediterranean ultimately led to the Punic Wars, a series of 3 conflicts that would define Rome's path toward empire. The First Punic War, 264 to 241 BCE, was sparked by a dispute over control of Sicily, which was strategically important for both Rome and Carthage. The war was primarily fought at sea, with both sides building large fleets to control the Mediterranean. The Romans, who initially lacked a strong navy, quickly adapted by constructing a fleet of warships, using their superior military tactics to defeat the Carthaginians at the Battle of Mylae in 260 BCE. After a long and costly war, the Romans emerged victorious, gaining control of Sicily, which became Rome's first overseas province. The Second Punic War, 218 to 201 BCE, is perhaps the most famous conflict between Rome and Carthage, largely due to the exploits of the Carthaginian general Hannibal. Hannibal is remembered for his audacious campaign against Rome, in which he led an army, including war elephants, across the Alps into Italy. Hannibal won several significant battles, including the Battle of Cannae in 216 BCE, where he inflicted a crushing defeat on the Roman legions. Despite his early successes, Hannibal was unable to capture Rome itself, and the Romans, led by the general Scipio Africanus, eventually took the war to North Africa. In 202 BCE, Scipio defeated Hannibal at the Battle of Zama, effectively ending the war and securing Rome's dominance in the Western Mediterranean. Carthage was forced to cede much of its territory, and the Romans established themselves as the preeminent power in the region. The Third Punic War, 149 to 146 BCE, was a final attempt by Rome to completely eliminate Carthage as a threat. In this conflict, Rome laid siege to the city of Carthage, and after a brutal campaign, the Romans captured the city and destroyed it. The surviving population was either killed or sold into slavery, and Carthage was reduced to ruins. The destruction of Carthage marked the end of the Punic Wars and solidified Rome's control over the Western Mediterranean. The Punic Wars were pivotal in Rome's expansion, and their victories over Carthage provided Rome with vast territories in Spain, North Africa, and Sicily. Rome's dominance in the Mediterranean was further cemented by the acquisition of additional provinces, including Greece, Asia Minor, and parts of North Africa. These territorial gains allowed Rome to expand its influence over trade routes, enhance its military power, and establish itself as the leading power in the ancient world. The Punic Wars also marked the beginning of Rome's imperial ambitions. As the Republic expanded, it became increasingly reliant on military conquest and the acquisition of wealth from conquered territories. The conquests made Rome richer and more powerful, but they also created new challenges, including the integration of diverse cultures and peoples, the management of vast territories, and the strain on Rome's political institutions. The expansion of Rome during the Punic Wars and its subsequent control over large swaths of the Mediterranean led to profound political and social changes that contributed to the eventual downfall of the Roman Republic. As Rome became wealthier and more powerful, it faced new challenges in governance, and the political system began to show signs of strain. The Roman Republic was founded on the idea of a balanced government, with power shared between elected officials, the Senate, and the popular assemblies. However, as Rome expanded, the complexity of governing its vast territories led to tensions between different factions within Roman society. The rise of powerful generals and military leaders, who controlled large armies loyal to them rather than to the state, further destabilized the political system. These generals, such as Gaius Marius, Lucius Cornelius Sulla, Pompey the Great, and Julius Caesar, became increasingly influential and often clashed with the Senate and each other. The growing inequality between the rich and the poor was another factor contributing to the crisis. While the wealthy elite in Rome prospered from the spoils of war and control over vast estates, the common people, particularly the urban poor, faced poverty, unemployment, and limited access to land. The plebeians, or commoners, began to demand greater political representation and land reforms. The Gracchi brothers, Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, were among the first to advocate for land redistribution, but their efforts were met with violent opposition from the ruling elite, leading to social unrest. The rise of populist leaders like Gaius Marius, who reformed the Roman army by allowing the landless poor to enlist, transformed the military into a powerful political tool. Marius's reforms allowed the lower classes to join the army, creating a professional army loyal to their commanders rather than the state. This shift in military loyalty contributed to the increasing power of individual generals and led to the rise of military dictatorships. The conflict between the Senate and military leaders eventually culminated in the civil wars that weakened the Republic. The struggle for power between these generals reached a breaking point with the rise of Julius Caesar. Caesar, a brilliant general and politician, crossed the Rubicon River in 49 BCE, effectively declaring war on the Roman Senate. His victory in the subsequent civil war led to his appointment as dictator for life. Caesar's reforms, including land redistribution and the expansion of citizenship, were popular with the people, but his concentration of power alarmed the Senate and the traditional ruling class. In 44 BCE, Julius Caesar was assassinated by a group of senators who feared his growing influence and sought to restore the authority of the Senate. The assassination of Caesar did not restore the Republic. Instead, it plunged Rome into further civil war, which ultimately led to the rise of his grandnephew and adopted son, Octavian, later Augustus. Augustus's victory over Mark Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC marked the end of the Roman Republic and the beginning of the Roman Empire. The death of Julius Caesar in 44 BCE and the subsequent power struggles left Rome in turmoil. The civil wars that followed Caesar's assassination eventually led to the rise of his adopted son and heir, Gaius Octavius, better known as Augustus. Augustus's victory over Mark Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC marked the end of the Roman Republic and the dawn of the Roman Empire. Augustus's rise to power was not immediate, nor was it without challenges. After Caesar's death, Rome was torn by rival factions. Octavian, Caesar's grandnephew and adopted son, initially formed an alliance with Mark Antony and Lepidus, known as the Second Triumvirate. Together, they defeated the forces of Caesar's assassins, including Brutus and Cassius, at the Battle of Philippi in 42 BCE. However, as the power of the triumvirs grew, so did their rivalries, especially between Octavian and Antony. Antony, who had formed a political and romantic alliance with the Egyptian queen Cleopatra, became increasingly unpopular in Rome, and his rivalry with Octavian came to a head at the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE. Octavian's forces decisively defeated Antony and Cleopatra, leading to their suicides in 30 BCE. With his rivals eliminated, Octavian was left as the undisputed master of the Roman world. In 27 BCE, Octavian officially offered to relinquish his extraordinary powers, hoping to restore the traditional republican system of government. However, in a political masterstroke, the Senate, eager for stability and recognizing his control, granted him the title Augustus, meaning the revered one, effectively marking the beginning of the Roman Empire. Augustus cleverly presented himself as the restorer of the Republic, but in reality, he consolidated power under his personal control. He held the titles of Princeps, first citizen, and Imperator, commander-in-chief, as well as controlling the army and holding ultimate authority over foreign and domestic policy. Augustus retained the Senate's support by presenting himself as a symbol of continuity, emphasizing the peace and prosperity that his reign would bring after years of civil war. The period of relative peace and stability that Augustus ushered in is known as the Pax Romana, Roman peace, which lasted for roughly 2 centuries and allowed the empire to flourish. Augustus's reign marked the start of a new era for Rome. Under his leadership, the empire expanded its borders, implemented vital infrastructure projects, and codified laws that would guide Rome for centuries. Augustus's reforms extended to every facet of Roman life, from social and religious policies to economic and military reforms. These changes were designed to solidify his control and ensure the stability of the empire for generations to come. Augustus's reforms were foundational to the success and longevity of the Roman Empire. His reign marked a dramatic shift from the chaotic and often violent years of the late Republic to a period of relative stability and prosperity. Augustus sought to consolidate his power, strengthen the empire's institutions, and create a lasting legacy through a series of social, political, military, and cultural reforms. One of Augustus's first priorities was to stabilize the political system of Rome. He recognized that the Roman Republic, with its frequent power struggles and internal conflicts, could no longer function effectively as the governing system of a vast empire. Augustus established a system known as the Principate, in which he held ultimate authority while still maintaining the illusion of republican governance. He retained the traditional republican offices, such as the Senate and consuls, but these institutions lost much of their power under his rule. Instead, Augustus controlled the key areas of military command, administration, and taxation, which allowed him to exercise complete control over the empire. Augustus also reformed the Roman military, transforming it into a professional standing army that was loyal to the emperor. This was a critical step in ensuring the stability of the empire. He created a permanent, professional army with soldiers who were paid regular wages, received pensions, and served for fixed terms. Augustus also established the Praetorian Guard, an elite unit responsible for protecting the emperor and maintaining order in Rome. By securing the loyalty of the military, Augustus ensured that his rule would be uncontested and that the empire would be defended against both internal and external threats. Economically, Augustus introduced a series of reforms that promoted growth and stability. He initiated an extensive program of infrastructure development, including the construction of roads, bridges, and aqueducts. These projects not only facilitated trade and communication across the empire, but also created jobs and boosted the economy. Augustus also reformed the tax system, making it more efficient and less corrupt. He established a census to assess the population and ensure fair taxation, and he reorganized the provincial administration to improve local governance. Socially, Augustus implemented laws designed to encourage moral values and strengthen Roman traditions. He introduced laws that promoted marriage, family life, and childbirth, aiming to restore what he saw as traditional Roman virtues that had been undermined during the late Republic. Augustus encouraged the elite to marry and produce large families, offering incentives for those who conformed to his ideals. He also introduced laws that regulated luxury and sexual conduct, aiming to curb the perceived moral decay of Roman society. Religiously, Augustus sought to revive traditional Roman religious practices, which had been neglected during the chaotic years of civil war. He promoted the worship of Roman gods and sought to re-establish the authority of the priesthood. Augustus himself became the object of a form of state-sponsored religious veneration, with temples built in his honor and cults dedicated to his divine status. By linking himself to the divine, Augustus solidified his position as the supreme ruler and ensured that his reign would be seen as divinely ordained. Culturally, Augustus fostered the growth of Roman literature, art, and architecture. He encouraged the works of poets like Virgil, Horace, and Ovid, whose writings helped to define the cultural identity of the Roman Empire. Augustus also commissioned the construction of monumental buildings, including the Forum of Augustus and the Era Pacis, Altar of Peace, which celebrated the peace and prosperity of his reign. These projects helped to solidify Augustus's image as the restorer of Rome's greatness and as the bringer of a new golden age. Under Augustus, Rome entered a period of unprecedented peace and prosperity known as the Pax Romana, Roman peace. This era lasted for roughly 200 years, from Augustus's reign until the death of Marcus Aurelius in 180 CE. During this time, the Roman Empire reached its greatest territorial extent and enjoyed a level of stability that allowed for the flourishing of trade, culture, and infrastructure. The Pax Romana was characterized by relative internal peace, as the empire was largely free from the civil wars and political instability that had plagued the late Republic. Augustus's establishment of a strong, centralized government and his ability to secure the loyalty of the military were key factors in maintaining this peace. While there were occasional uprisings and rebellions in the provinces, particularly in regions like Judea and Britain, these were generally suppressed quickly by the Roman legions. The period of peace allowed the Roman Empire to focus on expanding its borders and solidifying its control over the Mediterranean world. Augustus expanded Roman territory through military campaigns, securing control over Egypt, Hispania, modern-day Spain, Gaul, modern-day France, and parts of Germany. The conquest of these territories brought immense wealth to Rome, particularly from the provinces of Egypt and the newly acquired regions of the Western Mediterranean. Augustus also established new client kingdoms and allied states on the empire's borders, ensuring that Rome's influence extended to key strategic regions. Roman law and administration were spread throughout the empire during this period, helping to unify the vast territories under Roman control. Augustus's reforms in provincial governance helped ensure that local elites remained loyal to Rome, while Roman infrastructure projects, including roads, aqueducts, and public buildings, helped integrate the empire's territories. Economically, the Pax Romana facilitated the growth of trade and commerce across the empire. The construction of roads and the establishment of a common currency helped to connect distant regions, allowing goods and resources to flow freely throughout the empire. The Mediterranean became a bustling trade hub, with Roman merchants and traders exchanging goods with peoples from Africa, Asia, and Europe. The empire's vast wealth allowed for the construction of grand public buildings, and Roman art, architecture, and literature flourished during this time. Culturally, the Pax Romana saw the spread of Roman culture, language, and customs throughout the empire. Latin became the lingua franca of the Western Mediterranean, while Greek continued to be widely spoken in the eastern provinces. Roman laws, government structures, and social systems were established across the empire, and Roman identity became a unifying factor for the diverse peoples within the empire. While the Pax Romana was not without its challenges, particularly during the reigns of later emperors, it remains one of the most remarkable periods in world history. The stability, peace, and prosperity that characterized this era helped to cement Rome's status as one of the most powerful and influential civilizations the world has ever known. After the death of Augustus in 14 CE, his stepson and successor, Tiberius, assumed power. Tiberius's reign marked the continuation of the stability and peace established by Augustus, but it also represented a shift in the empire's political climate. While Augustus had been a dynamic and reform-oriented ruler, Tiberius was more reserved and, at times, authoritarian. His reign saw the consolidation of Roman power and influence, but also a period of increasing tension between the emperor and the Senate, as well as growing paranoia and distrust within the imperial court. Tiberius inherited an empire that was vast and well-organized, and he worked to maintain the existing structures of governance put in place by Augustus. He focused on strengthening the military and ensuring that the provinces remained loyal to Rome. Under Tiberius, the empire continued to expand, though his foreign policy was largely defensive. He kept the borders secure and sought to limit expansion, prioritizing stability within the empire over further territorial gains. One of Tiberius's greatest challenges came from the Senate. Although Augustus had carefully crafted a system of government that balanced power between himself and the Senate, Tiberius's rule was marked by increasing tensions between the emperor and the Senate. Tiberius was more reluctant to share power with the Senate, and his actions began to erode the Senate's authority. The emperor began to make decisions unilaterally, using his own advisory council rather than the traditional senatorial system. The Senate, feeling marginalized, became less influential, and the imperial bureaucracy grew stronger, solidifying the emperor's control. Domestically, Tiberius continued many of Augustus's reforms, focusing on the efficient collection of taxes and improving the infrastructure of the empire. However, his reign also saw the rise of the delators, or informers who would report on perceived acts of disloyalty or treason. This period of increased surveillance and fear marked a darker aspect of Tiberius's rule. His growing distrust of the political elite led to a series of treason trials, which resulted in the execution or exile of many prominent Romans. This atmosphere of fear and repression eventually soured his relationship with the Senate and the people, leading to his withdrawal from public life in the later years of his reign. Tiberius spent the last years of his life on the island of Capri, where he largely withdrew from governing and left the administration of the empire to his trusted subordinates, such as Sejanus, the commander of the Praetorian Guard. Sejanus, however, was later executed for treason after attempting to increase his own power at the expense of Tiberius, further deepening the sense of intrigue and suspicion that characterized the period. Despite these issues, Tiberius's reign solidified the foundations of the Roman Empire. He maintained the Pax Romana, Roman peace, and ensured the stability of the imperial system. His actions also reinforced the emperor's position as the supreme ruler, a role that would continue to evolve throughout the history of the Roman Empire. Tiberius's reign marked the continuation of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, which began with Augustus and continued through the reigns of his successors, including Caligula, Claudius, and Nero. The Julio-Claudian emperors played a crucial role in shaping the early Roman Empire, though their reigns were marked by a mixture of stability, political intrigue, and imperial excess. Augustus had established the imperial system and laid the groundwork for future emperors to build upon, but the actions and character of his successors would have a profound impact on Rome's political climate. The Julio-Claudian emperors were often characterized by their personal flaws and excesses, which led to political instability and, in some cases, the erosion of the public's trust in the imperial institution. Each emperor, in his own way, contributed to the evolving role of the emperor in Roman society. Caligula, the third emperor of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, is one of the most infamous rulers in Roman history. He initially enjoyed popular support due to his early promises of reform, but his reign quickly descended into tyranny. Caligula became notorious for his erratic behavior, cruelty, and extravagant lifestyle. He is said to have appointed his horse, Incitatus, as a consul, and his reign was marked by widespread executions and purges of political rivals. Caligula's reign ended in assassination, and he was succeeded by his uncle, Claudius. Claudius, who had been considered an unlikely emperor due to his perceived physical and mental disabilities, proved to be an able ruler. He expanded the empire through the conquest of Britain in 43 CE, and his reign saw significant reforms in the judicial system and the expansion of Roman citizenship. Claudius also oversaw the construction of major public works, including the completion of the Aqua Claudia, an aqueduct that supplied water to Rome. Despite his successes, Claudius was not immune to the intrigues of the imperial court. He was poisoned by his fourth wife, Agrippina the Younger, who then arranged for her son, Nero, to succeed him. Nero, the last of the Julio-Claudian emperors, is remembered for his extravagant and often disastrous reign. His early years as emperor were marked by competent governance and the influence of advisors like Seneca, but over time, Nero became more despotic and indulgent. He was notorious for his persecution of Christians, blaming them for the Great Fire of Rome in 64 CE. Nero's reign saw the empire suffer from a series of political and military crises, including revolts in Britain and Judea. His rule ended in chaos, as he was declared a public enemy by the Senate and ultimately committed suicide in 68 CE, bringing an end to the Julio-Claudian dynasty. Despite the personal flaws and excesses of the Julio-Claudian emperors, their reigns laid the foundation for the imperial system and helped shape the political structure of the Roman Empire. The empire continued to grow and evolve, And while the Julio-Claudian dynasty ended in bloodshed and political instability, it had a lasting impact on the development of the Roman Empire. The death of Nero in 68 CE marked the end of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, but it also led to a period of political chaos known as the Year of the Four Emperors, 69 CE. During this year, for different men, Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and Vespasian claimed the imperial throne, and the Roman Empire was briefly plunged into civil war. The instability was caused by a combination of military unrest, political factions, and the lack of a clear succession plan following Nero's death. However, the civil war ultimately ended with the rise of Vespasian, who would go on to found the Flavian dynasty. Vespasian, a general who had distinguished himself in the Jewish War, was declared emperor by his troops after Nero's death, and he quickly gained the support of the army. Vespasian's reign, 69 to 79 CE, marked the beginning of the Flavian dynasty, and he is remembered for his efforts to restore order to the empire and stabilize the imperial system. One of his most significant achievements was the reconstruction of Rome, which had suffered from years of neglect and political turmoil. Vespasian's son, Titus, succeeded him in 79 CE. Titus's reign, though short, 79 to 81 CE, was marked by major disasters, including the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 CE, which buried the cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum, and a devastating fire in Rome in 80 CE. Despite these challenges, Titus was remembered for his generosity and his efforts to provide relief to the victims of the disasters. Titus was succeeded by his younger brother, Domitian, who ruled from 81 to 96 CE. Domitian's reign was marked by a return to autocracy, as he centralized power in the emperor's hands and took measures to strengthen the imperial administration. However, Domitian's authoritarian rule led to growing opposition, and he was eventually assassinated in 96 CE, marking the end of the Flavian dynasty. The Flavian dynasty played a crucial role in the recovery of Rome after the chaotic period following Nero's death. Vespasian, Titus, and Domitian helped restore order and laid the groundwork for the next phase of the Roman Empire, during which the empire would face both internal and external challenges, but also continue to expand and thrive. After the chaotic end of the Flavian dynasty, which was followed by the short and largely unstable reigns of Domitian, the Roman Empire saw a period of relative peace and prosperity under the five good emperors. These emperors, Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius, ruled from 96 CE to 180 CE, a period often considered the apex of Roman civilization. The reigns of the five good emperors marked a time of effective governance, military expansion, public welfare, and cultural flourishing, which led to the height of Roman power and influence in the Mediterranean world. The first of the five good emperors was Nerva, reigned 96 to 98 CE, who came to power following the assassination of Domitian. Nerva was an elderly senator, and his reign was initially seen as a stopgap, as he was not from a military background. However, Nerva's brief rule was significant for his decision to adopt a successor based on merit rather than bloodline, a crucial decision that set the precedent for the succession of the next four emperors. He adopted Trajan, a popular general and military leader, as his heir, ensuring a smooth transition of power after his death. Nerva's adoption of Trajan marked the beginning of a new era in which emperors will be chosen based on their abilities rather than their lineage. This system of adoptive succession allowed for the selection of competent leaders and ensured that the empire was ruled by capable and efficient administrators. Trajan, who succeeded Nerva in 98 CE, is often regarded as one of the greatest Roman emperors. His reign, 98 to 117 CE, saw the empire reach its greatest territorial extent. Trajan was an accomplished military commander, and he led successful campaigns in Dacia, modern-day Romania, which resulted in the conquest of the Dacian kingdom and the acquisition of vast wealth in the form of gold mines. This victory was celebrated with the construction of the famous Trajan's Column in Rome, which depicted scenes from the Dacian Wars. In addition to his military achievements, Trajan is also remembered for his significant public works projects, including the construction of the Trajan Forum and the expansion of the road network in the empire. He was also known for his policies of social welfare, including the Alimenta, a program that provided food and education to impoverished children in Italy. Under Trajan, Rome enjoyed a period of military success, economic prosperity, and infrastructural development, all of which contributed to the stability of the empire. Trajan's death in 117 CE led to the succession of Hadrian, another of Trajan's adopted sons. Hadrian's reign, 117 to 138 CE, is often seen as a period of consolidation and consolidation of power, rather than expansion. While Trajan had sought to expand the empire to its greatest territorial extent, Hadrian focused on securing and strengthening the empire's borders and ensuring its long-term stability. Hadrian was known for his travels throughout the empire, visiting nearly every province and engaging directly with local populations. His travels helped him understand the empire's challenges and needs, and he was able to implement reforms that addressed regional concerns. Hadrian is particularly remembered for his efforts to fortify the empire's frontiers. He is best known for the construction of Hadrian's Wall in Britain, a massive fortification that marked the northern boundary of Roman Britain. This wall was built to keep out invaders from the north, primarily the Picts, and to consolidate Roman control over the region. Hadrian also abandoned some of Trajan's more ambitious territorial gains, such as the conquest of Mesopotamia, recognizing the difficulty and cost of maintaining these distant territories. Instead, he focused on strengthening the borders of the empire, ensuring that the provinces were secure and that military resources were not overextended. His policies of defensive expansion, rather than aggressive conquest, allowed the empire to maintain its power without the risk of overextension. In addition to his military and administrative reforms, Hadrian was a patron of the arts and architecture. He commissioned the construction of the Pantheon in Rome, one of the most remarkable buildings of ancient Rome, and he also constructed the magnificent Villa Adriana in Tivoli, which became a symbol of Roman luxury and architectural innovation. Hadrian's reign marked a period of stability, peace, and cultural flourishing, and his policies helped lay the groundwork for the continued success of the Roman Empire. Hadrian was succeeded by Antoninus Pius, who ruled from 138 to 161 CE. Antoninus was the most peaceful and prosperous of the five good emperors, and his reign was marked by stability, economic growth, and minimal military conflict. He is often regarded as one of the most effective Roman emperors, and his long and uneventful reign was one of the most peaceful periods in Roman history. During his reign, Antoninus Pius focused on maintaining the internal stability of the empire and strengthening its institutions. He was a skilled administrator, known for his fairness, and he worked to ensure the efficient collection of taxes and the proper functioning of the legal system. His policies were aimed at promoting harmony between the different classes of Roman society, and he implemented reforms that helped improve the conditions of the poor. Antoninus also maintained the Pax Romana by ensuring that the empire's borders remained secure. While there were occasional skirmishes with barbarian tribes on the empire's frontiers, Antoninus avoided major military conflicts, and his reign saw little expansion or conquest. Instead, he focused on maintaining the empire's vast territorial holdings and ensuring that the provinces were properly governed. Economically, Antoninus's reign was prosperous. Trade flourished across the empire, and the Mediterranean became a bustling hub of commerce. The emperor's policies helped stabilize the economy, and his reign saw the completion of several major infrastructure projects, including the expansion of roads and aqueducts. Antoninus also continued the welfare programs that had been established by his predecessors, including the Alimenta program, which provided support to children and the poor. Culturally, Antoninus's reign saw the continued flourishing of Roman art, literature, and philosophy. The emperor himself was known for his patronage of the arts, and his court attracted many leading intellectuals of the time. The Pax Romana allowed for the free exchange of ideas and cultural influences, and Roman culture continued to dominate the Mediterranean world. The final of the 5 good emperors was Marcus Aurelius, who ruled from 161 to 180 CE. Marcus Aurelius is best known for his philosophical writings, particularly his work Meditations, which is a series of reflections on Stoic philosophy. His reign, however, was marked by considerable challenges, both military and personal, which tempered the idealized image of the philosopher king. Marcus Aurelius faced a series of crises during his reign. One of the most significant challenges was the outbreak of the Marcomannic Wars, 166 to 180 CE, which saw the Roman Empire engaged in a prolonged conflict with the Germanic tribes on its northern borders. These wars stretched the empire's military resources and placed considerable strain on the Roman legions. Despite the difficulties, Marcus Aurelius was an effective military leader, personally leading campaigns on the front lines to ensure the empire's survival. In addition to the military challenges, Marcus Aurelius also had to contend with a devastating plague, known as the Antonine Plague, which struck the empire in 165 CE. The plague, possibly caused by smallpox, devastated the population, particularly in the eastern provinces, and further strained the empire's resources. Despite these hardships, Marcus Aurelius continued to rule with wisdom and stoicism, drawing on his philosophical beliefs to guide him through times of adversity. Marcus Aurelius's reign marked the end of the Pax Romana. His death in 180 CE brought an end to the era of the 5 good emperors and marked the beginning of a more turbulent period in Roman history. His son, Commodus, succeeded him, but Commodus's reign was marked by excess, mismanagement, and instability, leading to the eventual decline of the Roman Empire in the centuries that followed. The reign of Marcus Aurelius's son, Commodus, marks a critical turning point in the history of the Roman Empire. Whereas the 5 good emperors had brought stability and prosperity to Rome, Commodus's rule, 177 to 192 CE, marked the end of the period of relative peace and marked the beginning of a prolonged era of instability. Commodus's reign was characterized by a combination of corruption, extravagant living, and mismanagement, which contributed to the slow and gradual decline of the Roman Empire. Commodus became emperor in 177 CE, sharing the throne with his father, Marcus Aurelius, for the last few years of his father's reign. When Marcus Aurelius died in 180 CE, Commodus became the sole ruler of the Roman Empire at the age of 18. Early in his reign, Commodus initially appeared to follow the policies of his father, but his behavior quickly took a darker turn. Commodus's reign was marked by his increasing obsession with personal power and self-glorification. He began to see himself as a living god, demanding to be worshipped as such and renaming Rome's months after himself. One of the most notorious aspects of Commodus's reign was his fascination with gladiatorial combat. He famously fought as a gladiator in the arena, participating in stage battles in which he could easily defeat his opponents. Commodus's participation in these spectacles was a way for him to display his strength and virility, but it also served to undermine his authority as emperor. The emperor's involvement in such degrading acts contradicted the dignity and grandeur associated with the imperial office, and it diminished the respect commanded by the emperor in the eyes of the Roman elite. Commodus's reign was also characterized by corruption within the imperial court. His reign saw an increase in the influence of his corrupt advisors and officials, who took advantage of his indifference to governance. The Senate's authority continued to erode under his rule, and the economy suffered from his extravagant spending, which included lavish public games and the building of grand palaces. Commodus's mismanagement, coupled with the growing unrest within the empire, created an unstable political environment. Commodus's reign ended abruptly in 192 CE when he was assassinated by a conspiracy involving his chamberlain, a group of his close associates, and members of the Praetorian Guard. His death marked the end of the Nervanine dynasty, the line of emperors that had ruled Rome for nearly a century. His assassination plunged the empire into another period of instability, as his death led to a civil war over the succession, resulting in the year of the Five Emperors, 193 CE. While Commodus's reign was marked by decadence and incompetence, it was a reflection of the broader structural issues that were beginning to affect the Roman Empire. Political corruption, economic difficulties, and military challenges had started to take their toll on the empire, and his reign highlighted the vulnerabilities of the Roman political system. Commodus's assassination marked the beginning of the eventual fragmentation of the empire and the slow unraveling of Roman power. The death of Commodus in 192 CE led to a period of civil war and political instability that lasted for much of the 3rd century CE, known as the crisis of the 3rd century. During this period, the Roman Empire was beset by a series of internal and external crises that threatened its survival. The empire was racked by constant political turmoil, economic collapse, military defeats, and barbarian invasions. Following Commodus's death, the Roman Empire entered a period of rapid and chaotic succession, with emperors being regularly overthrown or assassinated. The year of the Five Emperors, 193 CE, was just the beginning of a long period of instability, with the empire witnessing more than 20 emperors over the course of the next 50 years. The instability of the imperial throne led to numerous power struggles, often fought by rival military commanders, and the empire's leadership became increasingly militarized. One of the key features of the crisis of the 3rd century was the increasing role of the military in the political sphere. The soldiers, who had once been loyal to the emperor and the Senate, began to take control of imperial succession, often proclaiming their own generals as emperor. The army became the true power behind the throne, and emperors were chosen based on their ability to command military support rather than their ability to rule effectively. This shift in the balance of power between the military and the political elite undermined the stability of the empire. The empire was also plagued by economic difficulties during this time. The constant civil wars drained the Roman treasury, and inflation became rampant. The Roman currency, once stable and widely used, became devalued as emperors minted coins with less precious metal content to fund their military campaigns. This led to a loss of confidence in the currency, and trade began to decline as merchants and citizens turned to barter instead of using money. The devaluation of the currency also had widespread effects on the social fabric of the empire, contributing to poverty, unemployment, and unrest. Externally, the Roman Empire faced significant threats from barbarian invasions. During the crisis of the 3rd century, the empire was repeatedly attacked by various barbarian groups, including the Goths, Vandals, and Franks. These tribes, once considered peripheral threats, now posed a serious challenge to Roman control, especially along the empire's northern borders. The invasions were compounded by the Sassanid Persians in the east, who launched attacks on the eastern provinces of the empire, further destabilizing the region. The crisis of the 3rd century saw the empire split into 3 distinct regions at one point, creating what was known as the Gallic Empire in the west, the Palmyrene Empire in the east, and the Central Roman Empire. This fragmentation reflected the difficulties the empire faced in maintaining control over its vast territories. Although the empire was eventually reunified, the damage done during this period left the empire weakened and vulnerable to further challenges. The crisis of the 3rd century threatened to tear the Roman Empire apart, but it also provided the impetus for a series of reforms that would reshape the empire and ensure its survival for several more centuries. In 284 CE, the Emperor Diocletian came to power and implemented a series of sweeping reforms aimed at stabilizing the empire and addressing its internal crises. Diocletian's reign marked a turning point in the history of the Roman Empire, as he sought to strengthen the empire's governance, military, and economy in the face of mounting challenges. One of Diocletian's most important reforms was the division of the empire into 2 parts, the Eastern and Western Roman Empires. Diocletian recognized that the sheer size and complexity of the empire made it difficult to govern effectively. So he established a system known as the Tetrarchy, rule by 4. Under this system, the empire was divided into 2 halves, each ruled by an emperor. Diocletian himself ruled the Eastern Roman Empire, while his colleague Maximian ruled the Western Roman Empire. Each emperor appointed a junior co-emperor, or Caesar, to assist in ruling their respective regions. This system was designed to provide more localized leadership and to ensure a smooth succession by having trained successors in place. Diocletian also reorganized the Roman military, increasing the number of soldiers and establishing new military commands to defend the empire's borders more effectively. He focused on fortifying the empire's frontiers, particularly in the west, where barbarian invasions have been a major threat. Diocletian also reformed the tax system, introducing more efficient and systematic ways to collect revenue from the provinces. He also sought to curb inflation by instituting price controls and reintroducing a stable currency. However, Diocletian's most far-reaching reform was his decision to retire in 305 CE, a decision that was unprecedented for a Roman emperor. He abdicated the throne and divided the empire between his 2 co-emperors, leaving the empire in the hands of his chosen successors. This division would ultimately contribute to the further fragmentation of the empire, as the Western Roman Empire and the Eastern Roman Empire began to drift apart. The Eastern Roman Empire, centered around the city of Byzantium, later Constantinople, would continue to thrive for nearly another 1,000 years, while the Western Roman Empire faced mounting difficulties in the centuries that followed. Diocletian's reforms were instrumental in stabilizing the Roman Empire for a time, but the seeds of division had already been sown. The empire, although temporarily unified under his rule, would eventually split permanently, setting the stage for the fall of the Western Roman Empire and the rise of the Byzantine Empire in the east. Although the division of the Roman Empire into Eastern and Western halves by Diocletian in 293 CE was intended to stabilize the empire, it ultimately set the stage for the gradual decline of the Western Roman Empire. The division was meant to make the empire more manageable by creating 2 autonomous areas, each ruled by a senior emperor and a junior co-emperor. Diocletian's reforms, particularly the Tetrarchy system, brought some measure of stability, but the root causes of the empire's problems, internal divisions, military decline, economic instability, and barbarian invasions, continued to fester, particularly in the West. The division of the empire had significant long-term effects on the Western Roman Empire. While the Eastern Roman Empire, later known as the Byzantine Empire, became economically and militarily stronger, the Western Empire faced increasing pressure on its borders and internal political instability. Diocletian's reforms were aimed at preserving Roman control, but after his abdication and the subsequent rise of Constantine the Great, the empire began to experience shifts in power dynamics that would eventually lead to its fall. One key challenge facing the Western Roman Empire after Diocletian was the increasing difficulty of defending its vast borders. The Western Empire was located at the intersection of various barbarian migration routes, which exposed it to continuous invasions. While the Eastern Roman Empire had the luxury of relative peace, given its proximity to the wealth of the Eastern Mediterranean and the defense provided by the strategic city of Constantinople, the West was continually under threat. Over time, the Western Empire's military resources, once the backbone of Roman power, became overstretched, unable to cope with the constant pressure for barbarian tribes like the Visigoths, Vandals, and Huns. Moreover, the administrative systems set up by Diocletian and later Constantine failed to keep the Western Empire from splintering. The division into two halves created a situation where the Western Roman Empire, though still officially part of the broader Roman system, began to develop its own interests and increasingly failed to coordinate effectively with the eastern half. This lack of unity, combined with increasing corruption, made governance in the Western Empire more difficult, especially as the central imperial bureaucracy weakened. By the time of the reign of Emperor Honorius, 393 to 423 CE, the Western Roman Empire was under siege both from within and without. Political instability, social unrest, and an increasingly ineffective military were compounded by the influx of barbarian groups into Roman territories. The Western Roman Empire was teetering on the edge of collapse, and it would not be long before it faced its final blow. One of the defining moments in the decline of the Western Roman Empire was the sack of Rome in 410 CE by the Visigoths, a barbarian group led by their king, Alaric. Although Rome had been sacked in the past, most notably by the Gauls in 390 BCE, the sack of 410 CE was different in that it marked the first time in over 800 years that Rome itself had been taken by an enemy. This event shocked the Roman world and symbolized the decline of Roman power. The Visigoths, originally settled in the Roman Empire as foederati, allied tribes, but increasingly dissatisfied with their treatment, had been in conflict with the empire for years. In 410 CE, Alaric, after a series of failed negotiations with the Roman Emperor Honorius, led his army into the heart of the empire. The sack of Rome was brutal, with the city looted and many of its treasures carried off. The event was not only a military defeat for the Romans, but also a psychological blow to the empire, as Rome had long been considered the eternal and indomitable center of Roman civilization. The idea that the eternal city could fall to a barbarian force was unthinkable to many at the time. While the sack of Rome in 410 CE did not immediately end the Western Roman Empire, it was a crucial turning point. The event demonstrated the vulnerability of the empire and its inability to defend its most important city. The psychological effect on the Roman population was profound, and the legitimacy of the imperial system began to erode. Rome's power and prestige had been based on its military dominance. But now, it appeared that the empire was no longer able to protect its own capital, let alone its distant provinces. After the sack of Rome, the Western Roman Empire continued to survive for another 66 years. But the final years were marked by a series of weak and ineffective emperors, continued invasions by various barbarian tribes, and increasing internal instability. The empire had become a patchwork of warring factions, with puppet emperors controlled by military leaders and mercenaries. The Visigoths, under Alaric's successors, would later establish a kingdom in Spain, further weakening the Western Roman Empire. In 455 CE, the Vandals, another barbarian group, sacked Rome again, carrying off more of the empire's wealth. Despite these repeated sacks, the Western Roman Empire limped on for several more decades. The Vandal sack of Rome, however, sealed the fate of the Western Roman Empire. By the time of the final fall, the Western Roman Empire was an empire in name only, with much of its territory controlled by barbarian kings and military leaders. The final blow came in 476 CE, when the last Roman emperor of the West, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed by Odoacer, a Germanic chieftain. Odoacer, who had served as a general in the Roman army, declared himself king of Italy and sent the imperial regalia to the Eastern Roman Emperor, Zeno, effectively ending the Western Roman Empire. Romulus Augustulus, a mere teenager at the time, was exiled, marking the official end of the Roman Empire in the West. While the Eastern Roman Empire, known as the Byzantine Empire, would continue to survive for nearly another 1,000 years. The fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 CE marked the end of the classical world and the beginning of the medieval period in Europe. The Western Roman Empire's collapse was a complex process involving internal strife, military decline, economic hardship, and external invasions, but also marked the final chapter of one of the most influential civilizations in history. The fall of the Western Roman Empire did not mark the complete end of Roman civilization. The Eastern Roman Empire, known as the Byzantine Empire, continued to thrive for another 1,000 years. Centered in the city of Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul, the Byzantine Empire preserved many aspects of Roman law, culture, and governance. While the Western Roman Empire fell into disarray, the Eastern Empire adapted and evolved, becoming a powerful force in its own right. The legacy of the Roman Empire in the West lived on in the Byzantine Empire's legal system, governance, and cultural achievements. The most notable of these was the Corpus Juris Civilis, or the body of civil law, compiled under Emperor Justinian I in the 6th century. This legal code was a comprehensive compilation of Roman law and would influence the development of modern legal systems in Europe and beyond. Justinian also undertook the monumental task of reconquering parts of the former Western Roman Empire, although much of these territorial gains were short-lived. The Byzantines continued many of the traditions of Roman administration, military organization, and culture. The use of Latin as the official language of the government and the preservation of Roman architectural styles, such as the use of domes and basilicas, reflected the continuation of Roman influence. The most iconic example of Byzantine architecture is the Hagia Sophia, built during Justinian's reign, which became one of the most impressive architectural feats of the ancient world. Furthermore, the Byzantine Empire maintained a strong and well-organized military, which successfully defended Constantinople from numerous invasions over the centuries, including the famous siege by the Arabs in the 7th century and later by the Ottomans in the 15th century. The strategic location of Constantinople made it a major center of trade and culture, bridging the gap between Europe and Asia and facilitating the exchange of goods, ideas, and technologies. The fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 CE also ushered in the period known as the Middle Ages, during which the remnants of Roman culture were preserved by the Christian Church, the monasteries, and the nascent European kingdoms. The legacy of Roman law, architecture, engineering, and government would continue to shape the course of European history, influencing the development of medieval Europe and the modern world. And there you have it, the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, one of history's greatest civilizations. We've seen how Rome rose from humble beginnings, conquered vast territories, and laid the foundation for much of the world as we know it. But we've also learned about the internal struggles, leadership crises, and external invasions that led to its eventual collapse. Moral of the story: the story of Rome reminds us that even the greatest empires, built on strength, wealth, and culture, can falter under the weight of internal divisions, greed, and the pressures of an ever-changing world. Rome's legacy, however, lives on in the lessons of governance, law, and society that it passed down, influencing civilizations for centuries. Thank you for joining me on this historical journey today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss out on more captivating stories from the past. If you enjoyed today's story, share your thoughts in the comments below, and be sure to come back for more episodes on this History channel. There's always more to explore, and the past has endless lessons to offer us. Until next time, keep learning and keep exploring, because history never stops telling its tale.